Hello and welcome back to the Race Coordinator Race Format Tutorials. This is a big one. In this tutorial we're going to be talking about group races. It may end up being more than one part because group races are a very complicated race format. Get a pen and paper, you may want to write some stuff down. Not sure. It's really up to you. Obviously you can go back and play this over and over again until it becomes clear. First thing I want to talk about is exactly what a group race is. I'm going to use management screens, of course, and I'm going to use my round robin tutorial, but I want to talk about exactly what a group race is. A group race is a race in which the drivers are assigned individual groups. How many groups there are, and how many drivers are in each group, and which drivers go into which group are based on the properties you see in front of you here. The important thing to understand is that the two, or however many groups you end up with in your race, in your particular race, run completely independently. So all of the properties that determine heat setup, heat scoring, overall scoring, whether you're using step-up races, F1 style points, all of those things affect the groups individually. So, and the groups even internally get their own group standings. So if you have a 20 driver race, and you have two groups, 10 drivers will be in one group, 10 drivers will be in the other group. They will be sorted as a group on a group basis, and then at the end of the race, essentially the overall standings are calculated based on other properties, which are on the screen also, and we'll talk about those as we go. But the initial grouping is sorted, and the initial grouping is sorting based on individual groups by themselves. Then the overall rankings are a complicated combination of the groups that you have in your race. The other thing to keep in mind is that each group within the race will not race in a heat against another driver in a different group. So these groups are completely and 100% isolated from each other. The only thing that happens is at the end, the overall standings basically combine the groups. And again, we'll get into that. That'll be one of the last things we get into. But so let me talk about how the groups are. Let me talk first about how the number of groups are calculated. So first off, obviously, if we want to do a group race, we're going to click Use Groups here. We're going to turn it on. If you don't turn it on, none of these other properties make any difference at all. Ignore the two team properties over here. They're all just the same. They're on the same pane because they're semi-related. But if you don't turn on Use Groups, none of these properties make any difference whatsoever to your race configuration. But now that I have turned them on, they make huge, huge differences. So the first thing I want to talk about is how the number of groups is calculated. There are a couple of properties that affect the number of groups. Specifically, the max groups, of course, the allow empty lanes, and the force multiple of max properties. I'm going to talk about each one of these three in a minute, but first, to help you understand what they do, you need to understand how the number of groupings is calculated. So the first thing Race Coordinator does is it takes the total number of drivers you have in your race and divides it by the number of lanes on your track. So it essentially tries to evenly distribute drivers into groups. So it'll create as many groups as it can and place the drivers evenly within them. So on a 4-lane track, if you have, let's say, 10 drivers, 10 divided by 4 is what, 2.5, I think 2.5. Race Coordinator will round that up and make that 3. So 10 divided by 4 is essentially 3. We're going to call it because we're going to round up. And what it'll do is it'll create 3 groups. Since there's 10 drivers, it'll put 3 in one, 3 in one, and 4 in another. I'm doing this all in my head, so that's 7, 10, yeah, that's 10. Now you'll notice the groups aren't quite even, but they're close, and that's the best Race Coordinator can do. So that's without any of the properties at all. So that's what it does first. The next thing that it does is it takes this allow empty lanes property and applies it, or it doesn't apply it. If you allow empty lanes, it doesn't do anything extra on top of that calculation I just talked about. If you uncheck allow empty lanes, what that says is that you don't want to let any heat have an empty lane in it. Well, that is a very significant thing to say, because what it means is that every group must have at least the number of lanes on the track drivers in it, or you'll have empty lanes in your heat. So, on a 4-lane track, if you have 4 drivers, you'll get 1 group. If you have 5 drivers, you still only get 1 group with 5, because if you created 2 groups, you'd have to put 3 drivers in one, 2 in another, and you'd have empty lanes in your heats. It's a complicated thing. Play that over again and listen to it. Hopefully I said that clear enough. So if you have allow empty lanes unchecked on a 4-lane track, you will not get a second group until you have at least 8 drivers. When you hit the 8 driver mark, you'll get 4 in one group, 4 in another group, and that's no empty lanes, and it's perfect. It's exactly what you're asking for. On your 9th driver, you'll still only have 2 groups. One will have 5, one will have 4. 10 drivers, one group will have 5, the other group will have 5. And you won't get a third group until you get 12 drivers, because then you can put 4 drivers into each of the 3 groups. Okay? Perfect. So that's the allow empty lanes property and what it does. Now on top of that, there is the force multiple of max property. This property is an interesting one in that you can force the number of groups to be a multiple of the maximum number of groups you're allowing. Now why would you do that? What does that mean first off? So what it means is that let's say this maximum number of groups was actually 4 rather than 2. What it means is that the number of groups cannot be 3, for example, because 3 is not a multiple of the max groups, or 4. So the number of groups would either be 1, 2, or 4. Coupled with all these other properties like allowing empty lanes, that can get really tricky. You know, if you have 12, if you're not allowing empty lanes and you have 12 drivers on a 4-lane track, race coordinator wants to do 3 groups, but because you're forcing a multiple, I'll check it so you can see it. Now you can't do 3 groups anymore, and it'll knock it down to 2 groups. It'll drop it down by a group. So again, okay, so now that you understand what that does, the question is why would you do that? And the answer is simple, because you've got this min advance property here, and I'll talk about that I guess I'll talk about it right now. And the min advance property is the number of drivers to force at the top of the standings per group. So what you can do is, the idea here is that maybe you want to guarantee that the winner of each group is guaranteed one of the top spots in the standings, because this is part of a race event, and the next race is going to take the winners of each of the groups and only race them or something. So by forcing a multiple of the max, you can guarantee that an even number of drivers come from each of the groups. It's just a way of making sure that every group has the same number of drivers coming out of it, and that fills in the next race. If you're not doing the next race, maybe you don't want to do forcing multiple because it's not important to you. For something like I believe the Hopper race events would want to do, well, they only use 2 groups, so I guess that doesn't really matter. But, so if you had, if you were going to try to filter up and fill in a 4-driver race and is the next race, you would want to guarantee that it was a multiple of 4, so that you could have either 1 driver coming from each group of 4 or 2 drivers from each group of 2, so that you can guarantee the same number of drivers advance from each group. Maybe you don't want to do that though. Maybe you only want 1 driver from each group advancing. Maybe you don't even want any. That's up to you. And you'll see once you start playing with it how that all affects the overall standings and whatnot. So that's what the force multiple max is, and that's why you would do it. Hopefully that's clear. We'll see. I guess we'll see based on what kind of feedback I get. And then of course the last property is the maximum number of groups. No matter what all those calculations I just did come out to, the group count can't be any higher than this number. If it is, we start lowering the group count until it is the maximum number of groups. Now, interesting, I'm looking at the code as I do this so I get it right. Race coordinator will blindly, if you've got more groups than the max, it will blindly just drop it down to the max, which is actually kind of not correct, because what that means is that it won't necessarily respect the empty lanes property in the force multiple. I'm going to actually fix that, and it'll be in the next release. But so consider the max groups the absolute maximum number, but it will still respect all of the other properties. So that's all of the properties that I want to talk about right now. The only one I haven't talked about is this balance, and that affects how the drivers get assigned into the different groups. I'm running out of time. I'm going to split this into at least two tutorials, and we'll talk about balancing next, and I'll show the setup, and we'll go from there. So stay tuned and take a look at the next tutorial so that you can get more information on group racing.